Hi there. I'm here today with Golden Krishna, who is the Senior User Experience Designer at Zappos. Hi, Golden.
Hi, how are you, Katie?
Great. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on here.
Yeah, very excited to chat with you. And today we have a special interviewer from ISITE Design. Colin O'Neill is joining us, and he's the VP of Experience Design here at ISITE. Hey, Colin.
Hey Katie, hey Golden, nice to chat with you guys today.
You too.
So yeah, I'm going to let Colin run the interview today. So yeah, I'll leave you guys to it.
Awesome, thanks Katie. So Golden, I think probably a lot of folks will maybe have heard a little bit about you and some of the things you've been talking about online. But can you give us a little bit of background? Tell us what you're doing right now and how you ended up in your position where you are today.
Sure. As Katie said, right now I'm a Senior User Experience Designer at Zappos Labs. And I'm also writing my first book called The Best Interface is No Interface, which I imagine we'll be talking a little bit about. Before I was at Zappos, I was working at an innovation lab at Samsung, which is also in San Francisco. And before I was at Samsung, I worked at Cooper, which is a design consultancy also in San Francisco. And Cooper works with startups to Fortune 50, the full range. And it's a design firm started by Alan Cooper, who really brought a lot of great user research ideas to sort of the mainstream of user experience, ideas like personas and whatnot. So yeah, I went from Cooper to Samsung, and Samsung's labs was really focused around creating new products that didn't exist currently. So rather than just iterations of what was out there, what can we do that's a little further reaching? And then a similar kind of goal, but with a totally different kind of company now at Zappos.
hmm And in what you're doing at Zappos right now, how does their focus on what they deliver to the customers translate into the experiences that you guys are looking at designing?
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of people know Zappos as sort of an older online retailer for shoes, and that's what it's sort of thought of, and that's what it's kind of been for a while. But what they really deliver and their core value, what they really push inside their internal culture is customer service. And first and foremost, that's what Zappos is all about. And so when I was at Samsung, the crux, the core of the company was creating, in a lot of ways, at least the divisions that we were a part of, was more consumer electronics. But the kind of interesting thing about what's going on here at Zappos is that thinking about people first, thinking about customer service as the core of your company, well, that aligns really well with general principles of design. And so when you talk about delighting people, when you talk about wowing people, wow is a principle, a company philosophy at Zappos. So we're not looking at boring things, we're looking at things that will really surprise people. And those are the kinds of things we're experimenting with in the labs.
And do you find at Zappos is it a different environment than somewhere like Samsung, which is much more established and has its processes down and perhaps has very structured ways of doing things, and where Zappos has a very customer-centric and holistic way of looking at things? Is it a different environment for kind of coming up with ideas around interface and interaction design and how you can do that, what you can do within a company like that?
Absolutely. I mean, Samsung is a huge organization. There are a little over 300,000 people who work there. Enormous. Lots of divisions, lots of necessary organization. Zappos is much smaller, 1,500 people, and much flatter. It's an organization where they take a lot of pride in employees being happy and treating and making their customers happy as a result. So everyone is kind of interested. A lot of the people who work at Zappos are interested in the future of the company. So when you come in and you have discussions with other groups, they're really excited to do things that will make their customers experience better. And so it's much easier to talk about that stuff, but the burdens and the challenges are much greater, right? I mean, Samsung is someone that gets almost instantaneous press the moment they do things. There are some things, actually, Zappos has gotten some mainstream press for recently by eliminating job postings and going in a slightly different direction there, by embracing a process called holacracy, which allows for more fluid organization, actually allows the labs to do a great deal more. So there's some really interesting good things going on at Zappos. I think when people are happy at the company they work for, it really changes the paradigm of what's possible. Now, I don't want to make any promises about what we can and can't do. I don't want to overpromise and underdeliver over the next few years, but what we're able to sort of play around with and what we're able to see is pretty awesome. And I hope that we can deliver on that potential.
That's great. Yeah, I think that's one of the things about the Delight conference and the blog is that we are really starting to try and understand, not only what it takes to have that great experience, at the end, but what it takes to actually build that inside. And very often we're seeing things like you're talking about. It takes optimism and positivity and ways to kind of connect with people within the organization who think like you and kind of build some critical mass around doing things a little bit differently and questioning some of the established principles that might be at play within organizations. So tell me a little bit about how you're thinking about no UI. Are you looking to apply those principles in what you're doing at Zappos at this point in time?
Absolutely, yes. So, I mean, when you look at some of the core things behind the idea of no interface that I've been sort of talking about and now writing about, a lot of it is around creating these incredible experiences, right? And that's the whole purpose of it, is to create these amazing moments in which computers are working for us, where things like data, we can crunch data like we never have been able to before, and we should take advantage of some of those opportunities. Now, not everything can be a no interface experience, of course, but there are opportunities to reduce the amount of interface, and there are opportunities to have these no interface experiences. And when you're at a company where they're not in the business of selling ads, or they're not in the business of just getting people more and more addicted to their site, but rather just trying to create these really great moments. I think it starts to, when that kind of stuff aligns perfectly with the end goals of no interface, it really starts to sort of scratch the surface a bit to see what we can really do. And so it was a big part of my recruitment and my discussions. It was the ideas of no interface, and partly because the idea is exciting in some ways, and also partly because the idea of just kind of questioning the norm is exciting for an R&D lab. There's potential, and because, like I said, the organization is so embracing of change, there's a lot of eagerness and sort of excitement around people that can bring new ways of looking at things. And for me, it would be incredible to succeed in creating a no-interface product there. But even if that is not the end result, just the idea of questioning what's happening and trying to go in a slightly different direction was definitely a part of me joining the team there.
That's great. And what's the team like there? Is it a team of UX folks who kind of think like you, or is it kind of more a cross-discipline group of people that you're working with?
It's funny. Whenever I look for other people to bring into an organization, I always look for like-minded people. But one of the great things about what's happening at the labs, and something that I've kind of learned over the years, is it's great to have people who are not like-minded. And that doesn't mean, I think baseline standards are criticality and deep thinking and understanding user experience as a general principle, but it's sort of disagreeing and agreeing on certain things. I had drinks with somebody the other night, and he actually didn't know that I was. So let me reframe this. I drinks with a couple of UX designers here at Zappos, and one of them had known the phrase "best interface is no interface," but didn't know who the author was, and the other people did. And so they kind of put him on the spot to say, "What's wrong with this idea?" And he just went through this huge rant, and it was great. It was awesome, and he totally tore me apart. And he didn't know what I looked like, which is totally fine. But I loved it. And that kind of stuff, to have someone check you, is, I think, a really important thing. I mean, part of critical thinking and part of trying to push boundaries is to question other people. And so when other people question you back, it just makes you smarter, and it makes a greater and greater thing that you can do together. So on the labs team, there are a couple sort of people who are like me, but in slightly different experiences. They lean towards user experience. And there's a couple of us there. There's a couple of engineers, some who lean a little more towards data stuff, some who are more about just pumping out lots of code. And we have a pretty small team and a lot of diverse experience. Actually, the guy who's in charge of Zappos Labs, his name is Will Young. Has been a part of Zappos for a long time, close friend of Tony Hsieh, and so who's the Zappos CEO. And so that gives us a lot of great insight into what's going on in the organization, but also he can provide some of the strategic, higher-level executive-like thinking inside what we're doing. So it's designers, it's engineers, it's a little bit of strategy, it's some product management, but it's really about having, and I think this is key, about having sort of deeper thinking, somewhat senior level people who are ready to sort of push stuff forward.
Mm-hmm. And at Zappos, are you guys kind of connected to just the mechanics of the business as well? I mean, obviously for an organization like that, the supply chain and how everything kind of interconnects is critical, because you're basically trying to deliver one experience. Are you guys connected to the end-to-end vision of an experience for the customer, or are you guys focused on what interface and interaction design might be around certain channels?
Yeah, when I told people that I was going to Zappos, some people kind of laughed about it, and they were like, "You're going to work on what, a shopping cart over there?" Because Samsung obviously has this enormous agenda with so many different gadgets and whatnot. But like I said, this idea of customer service is really interesting, and whether we can succeed or not, time will tell. But what's pretty fascinating is and sort of the range of stuff we're doing. At the lowest end is I would say, kind of helping the big machine and what's going on. But I'd say at the biggest end, it's about trying to figure out newer things. Now, I can't be too specific about what that really means, but sort of seeing what else Zappos could do. And I think there are some interesting things there. And like I said earlier, time will just tell. We'll have to see what's really plausible or what's not. And that's kind of the exciting thing about being a part of an R&D group, is you sort of you're distant, you're a little bit away. I mean, we are in San Francisco and everybody else is in Las Vegas. So we're intentionally in another city. Now it's an easy city to fly to back and forth in Las Vegas and whatnot. And it's a really collaborative group, so everybody wants to chat and whatnot, which is awesome. But we're intentionally in a different space so that we're not bogged down by the day-to-day, but rather can kind of think about things from a little more outsider's perspective. So sort of a part of the mothership when necessary, but intentionally distant from it.
That's really interesting. Again, a great opportunity to think, what can a company that has figured out how to deliver an amazing experience, what else can they do with that, rather than, a lot of businesses will be, well, we figured out how to make better widgets, or we've mastered supply chain. How can we leverage those assets? To be leveraging, great experience as a business asset, I think that's got to be really, really exciting. That's very, very cool.
It's totally fascinating. One of the things that if they, every employee, whether you're an executive or, working in finance or legal or whatever you're doing, every employee has to go through a sort of a call center training period, and also gets to sort of touch every sort of avenue of the business. So I'm part of being brought on to Zappos. I've been in some of these training meetings where I literally have just sat on call. So when people call Zappos, I'm talking to customers face to face, because what they want is they want everybody to understand that they are here to serve their customers first. And so even if, like I said, there's some people from legal who I trained with, and a lawyer rarely ever talks to a customer, except through very intense verbiage that nobody wants to read. So to have them sort of facing the customers and answering phones and kind of understanding the whole process from delivery down to the pixel level detail, I think is really great. So they really embody that as their thing. It's not as their core. It's not just something I'm saying today, but it's something that Tony Hsieh, as a CEO, has been talking about for a number of years, about trying to expand. And the labs is sort of a part of that initiative.
That's great. For folks who may not have read your blog post or going to be familiar with the No UI concept, can you kind of give everybody a high-level overview of kind of what the theory or the idea is about?
Sure, absolutely. So, I mean, it goes without saying, and I think even if you're working in the technology industry or not, I mean, phones and screen time consume our lives. And so there's been a number of people who, from a psychology standpoint, from an anthropology standpoint, have kind of taken perspectives on this and seen things like how does this affecting our teenagers, how is it affecting our adult life. I mean, we spend about 9 hours, the average American adult spends about 9 hours looking at screens a day, which is an incredible number. And so what I'm trying to do is look at it from a maker's perspective. So I've been making a lot of this technology. I'm guilty of pushing this additional screen time to everybody. And so it's kind of nuts that that I'm kind of stabbing myself in the back by saying the best interface is no interface, because for many years I've been creating interfaces. But along the way, I've kind of learned the flaws of this. And I think it really came to me when I was working at Cooper, and we were doing a lot of, like I said, great user research. So we'd go out and we'd learn these sort of really amazing things about a company or product or about a potential space. And we learn all this great stuff and have this bag of like really unique problems to solve. We started another project, and we go out and we fly around the world in some cases and talk to people who are using the product, who aren't using the product, who might use the product. And you learn again this other bag of totally unique situations and problems to solve. But every time you come back and you go to the whiteboard, first thing you do is you draw a rectangle, and you start to say, oh, where does the navigation go? Oh, where does the logo go? Oh, where it happens? How many screens can we make this flow? And you do the same thing over and over and over again. And I started to realize, in some of these cases, in many of these cases, the interface isn't the end goal. Even though it's our asset in some ways, sometimes it's not necessarily, and it often isn't the goal. It often is that the interface is a burden along the way. So I like to think of it as people don't really want to be using the interface. It's just sort of a tool along the way. And I've been working up this idea, and I have tons of examples which we can certainly dive into, in which when you get rid of the interface, you start to create sort of a better experience. And like I said, it's not possible everywhere always, and some people kind of don't like the extremity of the phrase, but in general, graphical user interfaces are often a burden, and getting them out of the way, I think, is one of these avenues to sort of sway us back to looking up beyond our screens and sort of being around the people that we love, the things that we want to do. Interfaces can be fun and can be exciting without a doubt, but in general, technology should be there to make our lives better and not take us away from everything else.
Okay.
That was maybe not a short answer.
Well, I think you'll be talking a lot about it at the Delight Conference, so if folks want to get a little bit more detail on it, that should be a great session. Tell me a little bit about the practical application of that. Obviously, when we look at designing an interface, or more broadly designing an interaction, there's a lot of value that we're used to identifying, and a lot of the language of experience design gives us kind of a set of tools. So we want to think about how maybe the UI or the product itself can communicate some levels of affordance, or can give us feedback in different modes. How does a no interface or a minimal interface allow us to kind of keep the interaction clear, and communicate the needs and the functionality that interaction provides?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the core things that I love to talk about is I've kind of just set out 3 general principles behind the best interface is no interface. And the first one sounds so straightforward, but honestly, when you start following it, it can create kind of magical experiences. And one of the examples I talk about when I talk about this first principle, which is to embrace your typical processes, is this idea behind keyless entry. And so, there's a number of car companies who have sort of jumped on this bandwagon of creating apps for the phone. And Ford, BMW, you could name almost any car company, has kind of thought, if we make an app, we're cool. And it's not just car companies that do this. It's pretty much, it's there in almost every line of business, where the idea of creating an app is thought of as being hip, it's thought of being forward, it's thought of being part of the next generation. But just the mere fact of creating an app isn't necessarily a better experience, right? And so one of the things that I talk about in the talk, and something I'll probably talk about in Portland, is one of my favorite examples, which is how crazy it is to use some of these apps. So one of the ones that BMW made a number of years ago and hasn't made any major updates since then is that they made an app that helps you unlock your car doors. And so, if you look at it from a marketing perspective, you can take a picture of the phone at an angle, and it looks so great in marketing brochures and whatnot. But when you start to think about this first principle, which is embracing your typical processes, you start to think about what's actually happening. It's kind of crazy. You start walking up to your car, and then instead of pulling out keys or anything like that, you pull out your smartphone. You turn your smartphone on. You swipe to unlock. You hold your thumb down or enter your PIN code. You swipe through a sea of icons to just try to find the app. You launch the app, and then you have to learn the vernacular, the language of the app. You try to dig through menus, and eventually you can unlock your car doors. And it's this sort of like 12-step process in order to actually do a very, very simple thing. And then it's not an improvement whatsoever on the car key. And one of the examples I love to talk about is that in the late 90s, Siemens created this technology that Mercedes first embraced, where you're walking up to your car doors, and when you pull the door handle, which is your typical process to open a car door, a low-frequency radio signal is sent out from the door, and it just checks a very small range, and if your keys are in your pocket or your purse, the door is just unlocked. So while you're doing the thing, it works. But your question is, well, sort of if these magical experiences are happening, how do we have feedback or what's going on? Well, part of it is just being able to do the simple things that we want to be doing and having the computer sort of embrace that symphony of stuff. So you can see the lock is locked when the door lock has its knob raised, but then when you lower it, and then when you pull the door handle, you see it raised. And you can include little cues, whether they're sound or little LED lights. There can be ways to give feedback if necessary, but it's not always needed if they're very simple things like opening your door. I mean, sort of continuing on this sort of keyless entry. There's a startup called Lockatron, which has kind of been copied by a couple other startups, which is something that goes over the deadbolt of your house or your apartment door. And when you get close, there's a Bluetooth connection or signature between your phone and the door lock. When you get close to the door, the deadbolt, the cover over the deadbolt unlocks the deadbolt, and you just walk into your house. And with the Lockatron, it's kind of a loud noise, so you can kind of hear it unlock the door, and that kind of gives you a signal that something's happening. I don't know if they want it to actually be loud or not, but that's just sort of the mechanics of it at this point in time. So there are little things, little hints that are nice, and those are very kind of straightforward things, right? You're opening doors and whatnot. There's certainly more complex domains and complex things to tackle where you do want to be a little more overt. One of the kind of examples that I've been kind of digging into, which is pretty fascinating, is leveraging a couple of the principles, and is sort of
Hello?
when your patterns are off, it alerts a doctor. And so, unlike other hospital machines, it alerts your exact doctor, and it does it through a text message. So the machine itself sends a text message, and so you get some of that personal connection that's more than just a sound or a light. I don't know if I got cut off a little bit there.
Yeah, I got hung up just a little bit as you were kind of getting into that example. But I think from what I heard, it touches on something that's really interesting. Is how much of these interactions and how much of the communication around them and the actual materiality of these interactions do we want to give to software, or do we want to have it much more present and practical in our lives? Is that something that is that an aspect of the no interface idea that you've thought through?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that this idea is really getting at is it's getting at computers, just shifting the relationship between us serving computers to computers serving us. And a lot of that means understanding you better so we can deliver those things to you, right? Now, sometimes we can just understand you better through proximity, like we could in the Walkatron example and the Mercedes-Benz example that I gave. But other times, things are a little more complicated. And so you need to kind of collect some data, collect information about people so you can make predictive sort of choices about somebody. And maybe you'll never really know. Maybe you'll just have 80% confidence that something needs to be acted upon. But at a certain point in time, it comes to the point in which you feel the computer should feel compelled enough to go ahead and commit a particular action. But a lot of that means like data collection, right? And it means privacy concerns. And having computers sort of working for us in this symphony in ways that we don't necessarily understand sometimes raises concerns, right? People wonder, I guess there's two coins. There's the privacy thing, and then there's the what if it breaks, or what if I don't really know what's happening. And the first one, there's a symphony of computers working around us. What if it breaks, and I don't really even know that it broke? Is a pretty interesting topic. There's all sorts of fail-safes in automatic solutions. You've probably seen the talk. I talk about how even an automatic sliding door you can kind of push to open. They don't, even the very, very simple automatic things have backups, but there comes a point in time in which some of these things could get so complex and could get so interesting and fascinating that we don't even know how to fix them. And I think part of that is okay. I mean, right now, if my running water, which is kind of an amazing invention, broke, I don't know if I could go out and fix running water. I don't think that I could go and dig up the pipes and reroute water into my house. It's an essential thing. I couldn't live very well, at least, without running water. But we've come to trust that the pipeline works, and there are people who are experts who can come fix those very complicated systems. And sometimes they're not as complicated. I mean, piping can be a little more straightforward. But you kind of come to rely on certain things. And I understand that there's some fear around that. I mean, every time we kind of give up a little bit more and more, whether it's running water or air conditioning or electricity, I mean, I know those sound like kind of silly examples that we can laugh about, but I'm intentionally pointing to them because people were afraid of them when they first came out, and they were with good reason, because they were giving up other things in return. They were losing control. And when you lose control and you don't understand the processes, it can be a little bit scary. So that makes a lot of sense. And that's why, that's why a lot of this stuff needs to be well tested. And it's not as quick in some cases as creating an interface. It's a longer process to create that confidence and to go through the testing that's necessary. I mean, you look at a company like Nest, which has kind of dabbled a little bit in some of this no interface stuff, whether it's their smoke detectors, right? I mean, they actually recently had a bug in their smoke detectors when some of the waving to turn it off wasn't working correctly. And what was reported in a lot of media was that they had to do a recall, but it actually was just a software update. So in some cases you could, and in theory, if all these products are digital, just quickly fix them. But in other cases, it's kind of scary. I mean, that's a smoke detector. That's a pretty scary thing. So it does take a lot of work to get there. But I think when you're confident enough and the product is high quality enough, then losing some of that control is actually a great thing. It's great to have running water. It's great to have some of these things that we kind of just rely upon.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
that's what really intrigues me, and what I responded to when I read your blog post is I think it's a little less about that there should be no interface, but what's the minimal reliable communicative type of interface that we need to build? For me, using the auto example, I don't know that we've beaten the car key, because that is a very simple interaction. It's a physical, trustworthy interaction. It connects back to, we understand the idea of locking and unlocking, and it's something that we've just embraced and has become part of us. And I think if we can look at the mental models around digital interaction and look at the things that are that can really find a home for us in our day-to-day lives and leverage those instead of weighing and putting all the weight in the interface. The other concern, I think, though, is that do you shift the weight from the interface to the infrastructure? And the water, the plumbing is a good example. We trust that infrastructure is there, but the more infrastructure we build, and I always think about the cloud, it's so magical and it's great that things are just in the cloud, but we all know on some level that those are huge server farms, sucking in tons of energy to make this magical experience. And what's the way that we can think about the infrastructure in a way that it's as light and as simple as possible as well. So I think there's a great opportunity within that conversation that you're leading to think about the idea of how simple and clear and elegant can we be within our design solutions. I think that's really, really exciting stuff. Tell us a little bit about what you hope to talk about when you're out here in Portland in October.
Yeah, sure. So, part of the Delight conference and part of being able to represent Zappos is pretty fascinating. So, like I said earlier, this is a company that really values customer experiences, and there's been some things that we've been talking about in the labs, and hopefully some things that I can share come October, stuff that we are talking about, and I have to be careful about what things I mention and what things I don't, but it's this idea of building great experiences is a no-brainer, and it kind of sounds cliche to even say it, but the actual execution of it is rarely really embraced. I think a lot of times practitioners are kind of forced in this situation where they're asked for assets, and their assets are screens. And the more of those assets, the more of those screens they have, the quicker they get them done, the better they often look to their CEO, their managers, or whatever. But that is, like you were saying, that's not necessarily the best experience, right? And I actually think the more you dwindle that down over and over and over and over, and the part of the reason that phrase exists is because the best case is nothing, but in many cases you need a little bit or a little more and whatnot. Winding that down, reducing those number of assets, which actually may make you look worse as a practitioner, is really the goal. Because in the end, that's what your consumers are really going to go after. And I think it's awesome to have a conference themed around delight, because that's really what this is about. And creating that surprise and that wow and that delight is not simple. And I think sometimes people fall on animations and apps and other things like that, which are nice and which can provide that moment. But I think there's nothing better than just having something just work. I think that is the baseline. When something just works and you can count on it and it's reliable and it's not in your face, that's awesome. That's what you want. When a circle spins around and does an oval shape and turns into dots, that's cool. That's a moment of delight, but that's not real delight. And I think that kind of stuff and scratching that itch and getting closer and closer to that and how we can get there. I mean, I think the philosophy is a couple years ahead of the actual practice. I think it's going to take us a while to get there. I think a lot of what you're seeing and a lot of the examples I'll talk about in the conference are really just at a hacker level at this point. Finding a way for the mainstream to embrace this kind of stuff, or creating a product that's for the mainstream, is hard. It's really hard. I mean, it took us a long time to do it with smartphones, and it's going to take us a long time to do it with these kinds of objects as well.
I think that's why one of the reasons I'm so excited to hear you speak at Delight. I think the event itself brings together a lot of people who have a lot of core design skill sets, but the feeling I get when I'm there is that it's people who are looking to apply those at another level. And I think the phrase that stuck with me, I read somewhere a while back, was beautiful utility, making things that are actually truly useful, and that's the application of our design skills, right? That's the elegance is in the utility and the meaning that provides in people's lives, and getting away from the assets and the artifacts, and really being able to bring our skills to bear on some of the bigger picture issues, and helping, giving design a place in kind of leading businesses forward. I think what landing at Zappos is a great example of that. The kind of companies that are truly able to execute on customer-centric thinking and really delivering something unique. Cool. Well, we're all really, really excited to have you join us at Delight. And thank you for your time today. I think this has been a great conversation, and I'm really excited to hear what you have to say.
Awesome, and thank you again for having me here, and I'm really excited to be speaking at the conference myself.
All right, great. Thank you, Colin.
Thanks, guys.
Have a great afternoon.